Wow, what a turnout on a warm September afternoon. It's great to see you all here for what is the first of 22 sessions that make up Cap Times Idea Fest 2024. Thank you. You know, this is the 8th year we've been doing this, and David's been right there from the start, and it's kind of amazing how time has passed and how many different speakers, just terrific experiences we've had, and this year may be the best. I'm Paul Fanland, publisher of the Capital Times, and I want to kind of look back as to how we got to this session today. Last March, David Maraniss shared with me the concept of an Idea Fest session that would focus on the wonderful dance project and later documentary film that was inspired by his best-selling book, They Marched into Sunlight, War and Peace, Vietnam and America, October 1967. His book was published 20 years ago, and I'm guessing that almost everyone in the room tonight has probably read it. I don't know, just curious. Hands? Yeah, I kind of thought so. It's an epic story of Vietnam in the 60s through the events of a few gripping and passionate days in Vietnam and here in Madison. I watched the dance documentary and was instantly taken by it, and I told David that I thought it would be awesome to have choreographer Robin Becker and documentarian Ron Honsa to Madison to share their work and talk about it. So 6 months later, here we are. Thanks. I want to take a minute to thank our many sponsors and partners without whom this whole week of sessions would not be possible. Epic Systems, Exact Sciences, HealthX Ventures, UW Health, the Carbone Cancer Center, Madison Gas and Electric, the Ascendium Education Group, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our co-sponsors are the University Research Park, the Century House, Overture Center for the Arts, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, the Wisconsin Historical Society, Madison Community Foundation, Cargo Coffee, the La Follette School of Public Affairs, Madison College, Leopold's, Books, Bar, Cafe, and the Forward Theater Company. And our partners are Hinckley Productions, Civic Media, the Wisconsin State Journal, and Madison.com. Before I go further, I'm wondering whether there are any veterans, Vietnam or otherwise, in the audience tonight. Anyone? Oh my, okay. I thought we could, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge you and welcome you given the subject matter tonight. That's terrific. I'd like to now turn it over to Christian Overland, the Director and CEO of the Wisconsin Historical Society, our sponsor and our host tonight. Christian.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome everybody. How many people have been in this building before? Oh, wow, I like that. I like that. So a couple of things. First of all, Paul, thank you so much for working with us and making the call to me to be a co-sponsor so we could participate with Idea Fest. We think it's a real privilege and it's an honor for us to do this. Not only just to be part of Idea Fest, but also a resource for your community and others. You may not know this, but the Wisconsin Historical Society started in 1846, a couple years before statehood. And we later on became an independent state or independent agency for the state. So back in the 19th century, something happened when we were a state agency. The legislature wrote our statutes and really focused us on the collecting, preserving, and caring for and sharing American history and the history of Wisconsin for the purpose to create an understanding of the American democracy. That's why we exist. So fast forward, this organization today looks back at what we did for those more than 170 years. We've created the American Archive of Historical Evidence for all of that. You may not know it, but here in Wisconsin, you do have a very large, significant American history archive and library and objects related to the whole nation, not just Wisconsin. And I mention that because we believe the collection is accessible in this building. You can come and get it. You can actually see it. You don't have to pay anything for it. You can go upstairs to an archivist. You can ask to see the first printing of the Declaration of the Constitution. You could ask to see Thomas Edison's dynamo that electrified light from 1871. All of that is here for you. It's owned by the residents. Our collections, though, also include authors, journalists, and writers, such as Dickie Chappelle, who was someone who was a photojournalist. She actually documented war correspondence, and she actually did through World War II, through the Vietnam War. Or like Time magazine correspondent Arlie Shart, who actually worked on with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and many to actually document and tell the story of what was going on with the modern American civil rights movement in the 1960s. Jerry Apps, very famous Wisconsinite, published many things. These papers are here too. And I'm very proud to say, I'm privileged to say, it's an honor that David Maraniss has chosen to make his deposit of papers here and his manuscripts as well too. Thank you, David. All these documents are evidence of the transformative moments of political, cultural, social, and economic history in America. And we believe firmly that history has a purpose. And these collections, by sharing them with you and others, we believe will build a better future. And that's why we're here. So thank you. I hope you have great success for Idea Fest this week. And cheers, everyone. Enjoy the evening.
Okay, well, let's get right on to our speakers. David Maraniss needs no introduction in this room. He's partnered with us, as I mentioned, when we created Idea Fest in 2017, and he has been a champion and a wonderful resource ever since. So he's, of course, a Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post journalist and author, and, of course, a famous Madison native whose father once ran the Capital Times newsroom, and we're so honored to work with him again. And I'd like to just take a moment to congratulate David and Linda on their 55th wedding anniversary recently. Now to our guests. Robin Becker was a principal dancer for a decade before founding her own dance company in 1987 and is among the nation's most distinguished choreographers. Her company received awards from the National Endowment for the Arts to support the creation of Into Sunlight, the dance based on David's book. Ron Honsa has produced hundreds of television projects. I read he particularly enjoys documentaries of the kind you're about to see, with a unique combination of business acumen and creative talent. Ron founded his company, Moving Pictures, more than 2 decades ago in Soho. His documentary about Robin's dance project premiered in 2017 at the Lincoln Center Dance on Camera Festival. One note I'm just adding here at the end, we are going to pass around index cards for questions later, and David will take questions at the end. The way this is going to work is I'm going to bring the 3 speakers up for some preliminary remarks before the showing of the film, and then they will retake the stage later. So please welcome Robin, Ron, and David to the stage.
Are these on? Yes, great. Thank you, Paul and Christian. I'm honored to have my papers here, and I know that your wonderful archivists will be struggling with my messy boxes for for a long time, for 13 books and my Washington Post materials, but I'm really delighted that I could give them to this place. This is a real delight for me to be with Robin and Ron. Some of you have read my book, so I don't have to explain that. And the film does such a fabulous job of both articulating the film and the dance. Some of you maybe saw Robin's troupe perform the dance at the Union here maybe 10 years ago or so, 12 years ago. But none of you have seen this film. And so it's the making of the book, making it into a dance, made into a play. And it was 2 decades ago that the book came out. It was during the heat of the Iraq War. And it was many of the themes of that book echo through the years, from Vietnam to Iraq to today. Sadly, so many of the issues of war and peace, of the role of dissent in American life, how wars are started, how in the heck they can ever end. All of those issues are dealt with in the book, in the dance, and in the film in a wonderful way. I want to thank everybody in this audience, the Vietnam veterans who are here, all the veterans, wonderful, but also the people who worked for peace. The war and the anti-war, these two very different worlds that were nonetheless really about the same thing. And one of the great ironies of the story is that the protest that I write about and that the dance portrays, that the film portrays, was against Dow Chemical Company, the makers of Agent Orange and napalm. But so many of the soldiers that I write about in this book died prematurely in their 50s and 60s from a combination of the over-adrenalized effort of that year in Vietnam and from the effects of the chemicals that were dropped in that country. We're going to have a further discussion after the film. For those of you who would love to stay, I'll have a few questions to follow up, and then we'll take some from the audience. I know that a lot of you have your own stories, and that's wonderful, but it's really not the time for that, so we'll just take specific questions about things after that. But I wanted to introduce you to Ron and Robin, and the making of the book, the making of the dance, the making of the film. But tell us, Ron, how did you get inspired to do this film?
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here, and I hope you get to see the screening. That we haven't screened this film in some time. The history of this film, it was done a few years ago, and we recently did a revision of the film that you're going to see tonight. So in some respects, the film is new, updated, if you will. The origin of our collaboration was really Robin and I meeting at a film festival, and she was sharing with me that she was working on a new project and choreographing a work based on a book, a nonfiction book. And I was very curious about that. I said, wow, that's interesting, because my background, I've as a filmmaker, I've done a lot of different kinds of projects, but one of the areas I've focused on is dance performance. And I was really interested in the opportunity to explore a choreographer working out dance movement based on a nonfiction book, on a historical document. And I was also predisposed to the Vietnam era. I grew up in that era. It was a very pivotal point in my youth, and I understood how polarized our country was at that moment. And Robin said, well, read David's book and let's come back and talk. So I read David's book and I went, wow, this is really extraordinary. And Robin and I started talking and collaborating, and I went to a couple rehearsals. And the performance part of it was fairly well staged. I think Robin was still working on a couple sections, but it was fairly well formulated. And it was like just a great moment to say, gee, let's make a documentary about the making of not only the performance, but the other opportunity was David was able to introduce us to some of the characters from his book. So what you'll see tonight is an effort to interweave all these really fascinating elements into a documentary.
Robin, the film itself explains how you got into the whole thing, so we'll leave it for there. But there's one part of the film that I'd love for you to talk about, which is I went to Vietnam in 2002 with two of the major figures in this book, in the film and the book and the dance. The daughter of the battalion commander was killed in the battle, Consuelo Allen, whose father, Terry Allen, was killed, and Clark Welch, who was a commander and sort of the hero of it. But then you went back to Vietnam so many years later, 2016 was it? Or 17, yeah. And Ron followed you there, but the film shows these amazing scenes from Hanoi and Saigon. But tell us how that developed, how you were able to bring the dance to Vietnam and how that felt.
Well, that was the 20th commemorative year of renewed diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Vietnam. And how we were invited to go was actually because our executive director met a Vietnamese artist in New York City. And sharing information about this project, he was very involved in being in both cities. He said this has to happen in Vietnam. And he connected us with people there. And we were invited to come and do a 3-city tour. And it was very moving for all of us. It felt like we were able to bring the journey of David's book and the development of this dance full circle. So, and really cultivate a community of unity and peace, which those are ideals that have led my entire path as an artist. And it was very moving to be there.
I've often said that my books have been translated into many different languages, but the most beautiful of all was when it was translated into this modern dance. And so the film captures the beauty of the dance as well. Ron, in your best James Earl Jones voice, in honor of, why don't you introduce the film?
Well, I think you have a lot of background to what you're about to see. I would like to add that Vietnam, when we started filming and shooting, and we didn't realize that Robin's company would be invited to go to Vietnam. So all good docs, you hope for a twist or a turn or some new events to happen while you're working. And this was a really big one because, as Robin stated, it was an opportunity to take what we were already working on and bring it to the very place that these events occurred. And it was fascinating to see the audiences in Vietnam respond to the work, which you'll see in the film is a section that, really, I think, embellishes, again, the full circle of the activity. So in many ways, as collaborators on this work, we're blessed by having the right things fall in place at the right time. So I hope you enjoy the film, and I look forward to taking questions afterwards.
Robin, I've watched the dance countless times and the film several times, and I learned something new every time, and I'm moved in different ways every time, but so deeply. And I don't know if you can do this, but the scene of longing when you're at the cemetery, I mean, I've cried many times watching that. That is the most universal feeling that we can all imagine. It goes even beyond war. It goes down to humanity. But is it possible? I know you're a choreographer, and a lot of it is just expressed in the dance, but is it possible for you to explain in words how you developed that piece, how long it took, how you dealt with Yoko and that incredible movement?
Well, is this on? Yeah. I think that piece probably began when I was a child. During the Vietnam War, I saw a photograph in Life magazine of Arlington Military Cemetery from above, No one was there except for one woman with her arms. She was on her knees with her arms around a tombstone, wailing at the top of her lungs. And that was the image that I never forgot that. And in my own life, my husband died very shockingly and suddenly, which was, of course, a big event to manage. And so when I was pursuing the development of this work, all those images were crossing, and I wanted to try to fulfill the simplicity and the power of that image that was seared inside of me. And so I just knew at first I thought we actually need a real tombstone. And we were trying to figure out how would we do that. And then we thought, well, maybe it could be a chair. And then one day it just dawned on me like, no, it's got to be just this solitary figure. And that's the mystery of how things happen when you're an artist. It's usually the deeper image just emerges. And because I had started out thinking, oh, it's going to be some kind of reflection. You'll see their history, and then this person become no longer present. And then I was like, no. It needs to be the simplicity of this. So the truth is also, I often think, this is true of many artists, that the critique in me, I was convinced this may be the worst piece I'd ever done. Like, oh God, there's nothing to it. It's so simple and da-da-da-da. And in fact, I am now very pleased with it. And also I want to speak to the figure sitting there. That took such hard work on his part, not only in strength, but also in concentration, because we had to somehow work on the energy connection between them. And sometimes I would watch it and there would be, I'm like, no, you guys have to be in the same sphere. There's still, even though you're dead, Ricky, you're emanating love here, and we need to feel it. And the two of you, and very interestingly, I'm sorry, I'm getting carried away.
Go get carried away, please.
We performed this at it wasn't, I forget where we performed it, but Yoko was 6 months pregnant. Oh, at CUNY, at City College. She was 6 months pregnant, and she's so thin, just like a tiny little blip on her. But as we were rehearsing, she had there was so much love in the room, and it was just like such a lovely dance. It was becoming a happy dance. And I was all of a sudden, now wait a minute, what's different? Oh, you're pregnant. That's a different energy field. We need to still keep the distinction of this longing and this separation. So it was just really an interesting process through all of that. Yeah.
Ron, I know that dance is not the easiest thing to film. It requires a special eye, different from some other events that you might capture in a documentary.
I think, that's true, and I think it's always challenging to find to work with the movement where you're not trying to upstage the actual choreography, because if you're noticing the cameras all the time, or you're cutting like you might see at a music event or something, it doesn't really work in tandem with the emotionality and the experiential movement that you're experiencing. So to your point, David, we explored a lot of different ways, but ultimately what we ended up doing, most of the performance was shot in Manhattan, in New York, and in addition to shooting multiple cameras and shooting a live performance, we actually shot 2 live performances at this one theater on 2 separate days. But then we also, after the audience left, were able to, I always like to bring cameras exactly where I want them on the stage. And then we shot inserts of various material that I, figured I definitely wanted certain angles and certain shots as we recorded the performance. So the editing was really editing the base of these 2 performances, 2 separate nights, with the same cameras and same positions, and then we had the opportunity to, as I said, bring the cameras exactly on stage. One of the nice things I think we were able to accomplish was on the stage we put a nice slider, a camera slider, so we were able to move the camera left to right, but very slowly. We weren't trying to be jarring or create some kind of notice to the cameras. We wanted the choreography to be center. And I think it did work out really well. I think it lent itself to, capturing the motion or the choreography. And again, I think I feel the strength of this film, other than the story and the characters and the interweaving of the archival footage and all the elements you've experienced, but I really think the core is how art can emulate an experience, how Robin's choreography can capture the emotionality of David's book and then be translated in a way that art can express, movement can express things that words can't. And I think that was the essence of working with the material.
I think the unsung heroes of this whole thing are the dancers themselves. I was lucky enough to get to know many of them, including Eddie, the Puerto Rican cheesehead. You'll all be happy to know he's a Packer fan. And Chaz and Yoko. But tell us about how you put together this troupe and who they are and where they're from.
Well, the people who were primarily in the burgundy and the blue are dancers that I've worked with for many, many years. And some of them originally had even been my students. And so I've sort of like inundated them with the things I care about. And then at the time of this filming, the people who are, the dancers who are walking in backwards in gray, they were, I teach at Hofstra University, and they were some of the most, really, the advanced students there, and who are all now having wonderful professional careers. And the educator in me also realized that the young people who I was working with didn't have a consciousness at that time about really what was going on in the world. And I really wanted to bring them in. And I think their lives were transformed. And meeting the people they got to meet, including David, but Clark Welsh and Consuelo, they're all still very dedicated to this project. It's fascinating. I think it really was transformative for them.
The film mentions that Clark saw the dance at Georgetown. But there's a scene that the film doesn't get, because you weren't filming it yet, which is after the dance. Can you describe what happened after that?
Oh my gosh. Well, immediately, Clark came backstage and all the dancers just were like, he's quite a storyteller, and they were just like at his feet. And then we all went out to dinner, and I don't think David is usually someone who stays up till 3 o'clock in the morning. But we were at the restaurant, and Clark was just holding court and just sharing more and more stories, and they had so many questions for him. And you could feel them just taking it in till it was David who said, "Clark, we gotta go."
Party killer. Ron, I'm fascinated by the editing process. I know how many hours of film did you have, would you guess?
I don't really recall, but between the interviews, actually not a lot. I mean, the performance we shot a lot, but if you recall, we did your interview the time you were in New York to see the performance.
Right.
I don't think we spent more than 45 minutes together, and then we did another interview with you and Robin. So I do work rather quickly, and I'm pretty concise what I'm after and what I want. But clearly there was a lot of material to work with. The challenge was weaving the story. I felt the narrative of the book was clearly a wonderful storyline to try to capture, but we also made some changes with the sequence of the dancing, because I allowed the storyline to kind of allow the interweaving between all these different elements in a way that we could tell the new story. Not that it was new, it was the same story, but allow it to be filmic, in the way it worked. So the editing was the most challenging part of this film. I mean, first we edited the performance work and cut the piece down so that we had the various sections.
Right.
And then within that, we reordered how the actual live performance was done, again, to correlate back to the storyline with the interviews that we had with the various people. And then, as I mentioned, we discovered we were going to Vietnam, so then we had this whole other element to integrate into the film. So it was great. You hope to have all those very good, different layers to work with, and I think one of the things I most like about the film is it's the way it's layered, and how the characters that David introduced us to carries the storyline, and yet the core of the film is the choreography that emulates the experience and the emotionality of what those people experienced. One thing I would like to say, that Clark, is an extraordinary, and wasn't, unfortunately, he's passing, and the pieces honors him. But we went to Florida, where he was currently retired and living, and I spent 3 days interviewing Clark, and because I was, and so much of it didn't make the film, because I knew this was such a unique opportunity to speak to him about not only the immediate events, but his whole amazing career, and so I can't say enough about, for me, and I was a bit on the flip side of this. I didn't serve in Vietnam. I was at a university, and I was a protester. I didn't see the justification for the war, but I always honored, and I've been around military people and other projects, and I always had a great respect for the serving in the military. And he blew me away. It was so listening to a person not only had these life experiences, but he could emulate them and explain them in a way that a civilian would never quite understand. So for me, that was the high point of the film, spending those days with Clark Welch.
Well, maybe this is unfair to put you on the spot like this, but all of my research, including all of my interviews with Clark, all of his letters, all of that is going to go to this Wisconsin Historical Society.
Well,
I think that your interviews with Clark would be a welcome addition to that.
Well, we should look at that, because there's so much more material. And I'd also like to acknowledge the Historical Society for working with us. Obviously, I needed to get all the stock footage for the, protest here on campus, and it was a great experience to come here they sent me reels and we went through the material, and it was, a great opportunity to get great archives and work through those archives for what we needed. And the other thing I'd like to do is acknowledge our producer,
Yes.
Nan Penman, if you could stand up.
Absolutely.
Nan is my
Yes.
partner. And when you talk about long days in the edit room, Nan is a writer and editor herself, and not the editor, but works with the editor. So when I was up against it, Nan figured out we could do it this way. I said, okay, let's go for it.
That's what partners are for.
That's what
Yes.
partners are for, right?
Yes. One more question about that. I'm sorry, but I know how to do it writing a book, how to weave, but I have, I use outlines to some degree. For you, is it the film, or do you put stuff on paper and have a storyboard of how it's going to go, or how do you
It's
do
not
that?
so much a storyboard, but it is very much, outlined on paper. I mean, we cut elements so we have completed modules. But then in terms of figuring out the composition of a film, this is kind of old school, but we have index cards with scenes on it and every little stuff and quotes what people say, and we have a big board and we move these things around. Now we do it on a computer because the computer can do the same thing, but back in the day we had literally index cards all over the edit room. And we would move that around because you could visualize that faster than make the edit. And sometimes you'd make the edit to see if it was going to work or not. But it was very much working with the material, and then the actual composition of the film was moved around, by index cards.
Robin, this dance has had an extraordinary long life, wouldn't you say, for a dance?
Yes.
And you've performed it at many different places, and you have that one veteran on the film, but talk to me about the responses you've gotten from veterans around the country as you performed it at West Point and other places.
Yeah, it's interesting. This morning I just reread the letter from the colonel at West Point that he wrote about Into Sunlight, and just that he was a veteran of recent wars, and that also recent other current military members were in the audience. And in the talk back, it was such an emotional conversation following the work because of just what it evoked. And that most of all, I hear the thank yous. One man at a screening, there was no applause. It was mostly veterans. There was no applause. And this man was wearing a hat that said, Vietnam was on blankety blank. Oh, God, it was something. Anyway, blankety blank blank.
Right.
And he got up and he walked across the room right to me, and there was still silence, and he took his hat off, put his arms around me, and started sobbing. And then he took a step back and he said, my shrink has been trying to get me to cry for 30 years. Wow. But this film got me to cry. And you are going to be the person who brings me back to life. You're civilizing me, he said. And it actually went on to, I set a section of this at Hofstra, and he came out and he spoke to the students that I was working with at the time. And it's been very moving to work with him. But this is the type of response. And one of my dancers said she was actually at a McDonald's after a performance and ran into a man who recognized her. And he came up to her and he was crying, and he said, "Thank you. You just made everything better for me. Didn't fix it, but you just made everything better for me. Thank you." And I think most veterans feel like they're just grateful that someone else was trying to take on their story and learn from just the reenactment what it brought to them in the reenactment of something.
That's beautiful. Well, it's had a long life, and we would all like it to have an even longer life. So if anybody in the audience was moved by this, we'd love for Wisconsin Public Television to show this documentary. I think it'd be perfect for that. So anybody here who has connections with WPT or wants to write them a letter and urge them to do it, I think that would be wonderful. We're still trying to get this story out there because I think it's a timeless, universal, powerful film and dance.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Yep.